What if I told you that everything you thought was impossible is now happening right before your eyes? That for the first time in modern history, 40 Muslim nations, once divided, once silent, are now rising together with one voice, one purpose, and one mission. This isn't just another conflict. This is a reckoning. Iran struck first, bold, calculated, defiant. But what followed? That's the real story. Not panic, not surrender, but unity like never before. This is not just a battle of weapons. It's a battle of will, of identity, of survival. And as the world watches in silence, a new chapter is being written. Not by superpowers, not by foreign forces, but by the Muslim world itself. So don't blink, don't scroll, don't look away. Because what you're about to witness is history in motion. Raw, real, and unstoppable. Iran's bold, preemptive strike marked more than just a military action. It was a deliberate disruption of the fragile balance that has existed for decades in the Middle East. This strike was not spontaneous. It was a calculated move, fueled by a mix of historical grievances, geopolitical ambition, and rising regional tension. For years, Iran has walked a tightrope between defiance and diplomacy, constantly testing boundaries, expanding its influence, and projecting power through proxy networks across Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and Iraq. But this time, it wasn't a shadow operation. It was overt, loud, undeniable, a direct challenge to the status quo, signaling that Tehran no longer intends to play by the old rules. What made this moment so significant wasn't just the military impact, but the symbolism behind it. Iran has often presented itself as a leader of resistance in the Muslim world, standing up against Western dominance, Israeli aggression, and Gulf monarchy influence. But by striking first, it removed any veil of defense or justification. It stepped into the spotlight as the aggressor, not the defender. This shift altered perception, not just among adversaries, but also among former allies and neutral observers. The geopolitical landscape shifted overnight. Countries that once remained hesitant or diplomatically neutral began to reassess their positions. The boldness of Iran's move forced its neighbors to confront a haunting question. If Iran could do this now, what could come next? Would borders hold? Would airspace remain sacred? Would diplomacy be respected anymore? This was more than a strike, it was a message, a declaration that Iran was ready to lead from the front lines, regardless of consequence. And it echoed across capitals, deserts, and corridors of power. It tested alliances, strained old friendships, and accelerated the urgency of collective regional responses. The strike fractured illusions of stability and reminded the world that the Middle East remains volatile, reactive, and alive with unfinished history. Iran's move also brought hidden fears to the surface. For years, nations have quietly built arsenals, expanded intelligence, and modernized forces just in case. That case arrived in the form of missiles and headlines. The unthinkable was now reality. The world watched, but more importantly, the Muslim world awakened, not out of awe, but out of necessity. The unity of 40 Muslim nations in response to Iran's strike is a phenomenon not seen in modern history. For decades, the Muslim world has been fractured by political rivalries, sectarian divisions, colonial legacies, and economic competition. Nations like Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, Pakistan, and others have often found themselves on opposing sides of regional conflicts or locked in silent competition for influence. Yet, in the wake of Iran's aggressive move, those divisions began to blur, replaced by a shared urgency and a collective sense of threat that transcended borders and ideologies. This alignment did not happen overnight, nor was it simply the result of political convenience. It emerged from a growing realization that unchecked aggression from any one power threatens the stability of all. Iran's strike was seen not just as an isolated event, but as a symbol of what could happen when a nation acts without regard for its neighbors or the fragile peace that holds the region together. The fear that such boldness could become a pattern served as a unifying catalyst. It forced leaders to look beyond historical differences and prioritize the survival and dignity of the greater Muslim community. Across military headquarters, diplomatic channels, and religious platforms, discussions shifted from reaction to coordination. Intelligence sharing increased. Military drills were no longer confined within national borders, but became joint efforts designed to show unity and deterrence. Political leaders began speaking in tones of solidarity, referencing not just national security, but the security of the Ummah as a whole. Religious scholars invoked the responsibility of collective defense and protection of innocent lives, giving the movement not just political backing, but moral and spiritual weight. The people of these nations, too, played a role in this alignment. Social media flooded with calls for unity, with voices across ethnicities and sects demanding that leaders act as one. The youth, often disillusioned by politics, found renewed purpose in the idea that perhaps this was the moment when Muslim nations could rise above internal divisions and finally stand shoulder to shoulder. Their unity became not only a strategy, but a symbol, a message that the Muslim world, when threatened at its core, could remember its shared roots, shared faith, and shared duty. What was once scattered has now begun to gather, not out of revenge, but out of responsibility. The response of the 40 Muslim nations is not rooted in vengeance, but in a deep, shared pursuit of justice. While the world often expects retaliation to be driven by anger or pride, this coalition has chosen a higher ground, one that prioritizes order, accountability, and protection over chaos. Iran's first strike may have been intended to provoke, to ignite fury, and push the region into uncontrolled retaliation. But what followed instead was a calculated, morally grounded mobilization. These nations are not preparing to fight for revenge. They are preparing to stop the cycle of violence that unchecked aggression can trigger. Justice, in this context, means setting boundaries, not only militarily, but ethically. It means sending a message that no state, regardless of power or ideology, can act as both judge and executioner without consequence. By coming together in a measured yet firm response, these nations are working to reestablish the rule of international conduct and regional respect. They're not seeking to destroy Iran, but to stop a precedent that could open doors to more unilateral strikes, more civilian suffering, and more regional instability. The aim is not punishment, but prevention, not destruction, but deterrence. This is why their strategy isn't emotional or erratic. It's structured. Legal channels have been activated. International bodies have been notified. Evidence has been compiled and statements have been issued with clarity and restraint. Leaders across the region are speaking not in the language of hate, but of duty. A duty to protect the lives of their citizens, the sovereignty of their nations, and the legacy of peace that every generation longs for, but rarely inherits. At the heart of this stand lies a deep understanding that the world is watching. If these nations were to react with reckless force, they would risk becoming the very thing they stand against. Instead, they are choosing to act with integrity, unity, and purpose. This isn't about revenge for a missile, a strike, or a speech. It's about preventing a future where any country believes it can strike first without facing a wall of united resistance. It's about telling the next generation that justice was not just spoken about, but defended, lived, and carried out with strength, guided by principle. The formation of an unprecedented military and strategic alliance among 40 Muslim nations marks a turning point in regional defense dynamics. For years, cooperation in the Muslim world has largely remained symbolic or limited to small, temporary coalitions. But the threat posed by Iran's sudden and aggressive strike has changed that landscape, pushing these nations to form a more serious, tactical, and long-term coalition. This is not just about assembling troops or issuing joint statements. It's about building an interconnected web of military strength that functions as one unified force, capable of rapid deployment, intelligence sharing, and coordinated response. Joint military exercises that were once infrequent are now being conducted with urgency, across borders and involving multiple armies at once. Command structures are being integrated so that communication flows seamlessly from one nation's leadership to another. This level of coordination demands trust, something that has historically been scarce in the region. Yet the urgency of the situation has made cooperation not only possible but essential. Commanders are exchanging notes. Strategic planners are creating shared defense grids, and nations are aligning their air defenses, naval positions, and cyber capabilities into a single, formidable structure. Technology, too, is playing a key role. Drone fleets are being synchronized, satellite surveillance is being pooled, and digital war rooms are being linked across capitals. From Morocco to Malaysia, nations are combining their strengths, not in competition, but in complement. Pakistan's battlefield experience, Turkey's drone expertise, Saudi Arabia's air capabilities, and Egypt's ground forces are all coming together like a puzzle previously thought impossible to assemble. The result is not just a coalition, but a deterrent. A wall of readiness meant to prevent further escalation and demonstrate that any further aggression will be met with swift and coordinated resistance. This alliance also includes intelligence coordination that goes beyond borders. Data is being collected, analyzed, and shared in real time. Suspicious movements are no longer monitored by one country alone, but flagged across the network. This ensures that no surprise strike can catch the coalition off guard again. It also signals to Iran and the world that the Muslim world is no longer a scattered collection of isolated powers. It is a connected force, capable of defending its people, its borders, and its future with unity, precision, and purpose. The awakening of the Muslim world following Iran's first strike is not merely political or military. It is emotional, spiritual, and deeply generational. For years, Muslims across the globe have watched their lands suffer under conflict, division, foreign interference, and internal betrayal. Many grew disillusioned by the endless cycle of summits that produced no action, leaders who preached unity but pursued self-interest, and conflicts that seemed to serve only external powers. But now, in the shadow of a moment that threatened to plunge the region into deeper chaos, something has shifted. A collective awareness that waiting for change is no longer an option. In streets from Cairo to Karachi, in homes, mosques, and universities, a new sense of urgency has taken hold. The people are no longer content with words. They are demanding action, accountability, and dignity. Youth who once felt powerless are now engaging with purpose, realizing that the future of their nations and the legacy of their faith are directly tied to what happens next. Iran's strike was more than a provocation. It was a mirror that forced the Muslim world to see its own reflection. Fractured, reactive, often passive, and to choose whether to remain that way or finally rise with intention and unity. This awakening has found expression in social media movements, in public demonstrations, in sermons, and in art. Influencers, scholars, and community leaders are echoing a single message: the time to stand together is now. The cultural and spiritual bonds that tie the Muslim world together, once buried under politics and sectarianism, are being rediscovered. There is a return to shared identity, not just as citizens of individual nations, but as members of a larger community with common roots, common values, and common hopes. This moment has also bridged gaps that previously seemed impossible to close. Sunni and Shia communities are initiating dialogue, regional rivals are exchanging strategic support, and political leaders are responding to the call of their people rather than the interests of foreign allies. The narrative is changing from one of weakness and reaction to one of strength and initiative. The awakening is not a cry for war, but a cry for dignity, a declaration that the Muslim world will no longer be silent, scattered, or ignored when its future is on the line. As the coalition of 40 Muslim nations mobilizes in response to Iran's strike, a profound contrast is becoming evident between global silence and historical accountability. While world powers and international organizations offer muted responses, carefully worded statements, or complete neutrality, history is recording every decision, every hesitation, and every act of courage or cowardice. The silence from the West, and even from some major non-Muslim global players, is not surprising to many in the region. It is a repetition of a pattern where Muslim suffering is observed but not confronted, where strategic interests outweigh moral responsibility. However, this time the silence is being answered, not with despair, but with action. The Muslim world, long accustomed to waiting for the approval or involvement of external forces, is realizing that history will not remember who remained quiet. It will remember who stood up. This moment is less about the response from the United Nations or global media, and more about how the Muslim world chooses to define its future. The narrative is being shaped internally now by leaders who listen to their people, by nations acting in coordinated defense, and by voices that refuse to be drowned out by geopolitical convenience. What makes this moment historically significant is not the magnitude of Iran's strike alone, but the clarity it has brought. It exposed alliances that are transactional, it revealed the limitations of international diplomacy, and it tested the integrity of those who claim to support peace. The global silence is not being seen as neutrality, it is being interpreted as indifference, even complicity. And that perception is fueling a deeper determination among Muslim nations to take control of their own fate, to no longer rely on others to protect their interests, borders, or people. In classrooms, courtrooms, media platforms, and government halls, there is a growing awareness that this is a turning point. The decisions made now will not only affect current generations, but will be studied, debated, and remembered by those yet to come. Whether history tells the story of a fragmented people who fell deeper into conflict, or of a united force that rose above division to establish dignity and justice, depends entirely on what is done next. I think history is not written by those who watched. It is written by those who acted when it mattered most. So here we stand, not at the edge of war, but at the crossroads of destiny. Iran struck first, but what followed was not fear, not chaos, not collapse. It was awakening. It was the sound of borders becoming bridges, of voices rising in unity, of a long-divided Ummah standing as one. 40 nations, once scattered by politics and pride, now prepared to face the future together, not for vengeance, but for justice, not to destroy, but to defend, not to repeat the past, but to rewrite it. The world may remain silent, but we will not, because this moment isn't just about battlefields or headlines. It's about legacy, about who we are and what we choose to become when tested. To every listener who carries faith in their heart and strength in their voice, good luck in your journey ahead. May you walk with clarity, speak with courage, and rise with honor. Thank you for standing with truth. Thank you for believing in unity. And thank you for being part of history in the making.